Today, we're going to be talking about how we can optimize our game easily with the Flyweight pattern in Unity. You can apply this to any code in reality, but Unity offers a very easy and unique solution. Really, most game engines have something similar to this, and it will optimize our code significantly. Before we begin, let's talk about what Flyweight is. So in Paint here, let's say we have a bunch of enemies. Now, it makes sense to say that every enemy has a health and a max health. However, in your enemy script, you would give them their variables, right? You'd have health and you'd have max health. The only problem is, if you were to just make these in the enemy scripts and you applied them, then every single enemy would have their own copy of health and max health. So a float is 32 bits, you have 2 of them, and then 4 enemies. This is how much data you're going to use. It's not a lot, it's not, but when you start to get more, it's worth considering. And even like the fact we can optimize this is something you should consider in the first place, because we lose nothing for doing it, right? So what we can do, instead of saying that max health is something that belongs to all of them, they should all share the same max health. If they're all goats, you can say that every goat has a max health of 10, right? Without hard coding it, we can make something called a scriptable object, and we kind of just exist over here. And they'd all receive the same reference value. So really, it's going to be 32 times 1 times 4 plus 32. And this is for the first one. It's for the health, because all of them should have a different health. That's kind of the drawback here. If they all have a different health, then it's still this. But they all share a max health. 32. Hopefully I didn't mess it up too much on my presentation skills. But that's the idea. Variables that they're all going to share that will be the same no matter what, those we make into scriptable objects. And we can optimize, and we'd save quite a bit. We'd save 32 times 3. What is that, 96? 96 bits of data, at least in this small scale instance. All right, so to do this, in your scripts folder, we're going to create a new folder called scriptable objects. And then in here, let's create a new, and then C# script, and let's call it weapon SO for scriptable object. Then in the top right, you can press on this drop down, you can choose an icon, and this is going to reflect out into the rest of them. So I am going to do this one because it's a weapon, so red, and then I like to do circles for my scriptable objects. Or you could choose other, and you can like literally find whatever image you want. It just makes it a little bit neater. It's not necessary at all. Okay, so now that we have this, let's open our script. And here it is. And we also have to consider the script that we want to optimize here. I'm only going to do one. We're going to optimize the, where is it? Weapon base. There it is, weapon base. So we just need weapon base and weapon SO. Now, looking at your object, look at everything in here that could possibly be reduced to only being needed once. Okay? Time between attacks, definitely. Because every object of this type, every bow, should have the same time between attacks. They should all have the same charge up time. They should all have the same min charge percent. They should all be fully auto or not fully auto. So really, it's all of these, right? And that's fantastic, because we can save, this is 8 bits, this is 32, this is 32, this is also 32. That's a lot of data saved, and it's for every single weapon. Now, there's more than just the serialized thing, so I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But first, let's move these. And then, let's delete all this and put it in here. Okay? Before we continue, though, we should modify weapon SO, because our weapon SO being a mono behavior means it's a game object. That isn't true. It's a scriptable object. And doing that, we need to modify how it's created in the first place. So at the top, and I can never remember this, so I always have to pull up a reference, which is just this, because I genuinely can never remember it. We need to say create asset menu, file name, data, menu name, and all this stuff. Now I'm literally going to copy and paste it because I can deal with it. And we're going to rename it. So our file name, let's call it weapon stats. And then our menu name is going to be my scriptable objects. And you'll see this soon. And then slash, and let's call it weapon stats. Okay, we want this to be towards the top, doesn't matter. This is like how high it is in the chart, doesn't matter. Anyways, so from here we have all of our stuff, but we have kind of an issue. If we want our child, or not our child, but our other component to be able to access everything, and let me kind of just start hiding stuff. If you want the weapon base to be able to access these variables, that means they need to be public. So we make them all public. But if they're all public, they don't need to be serialized. But if they're all public at the same time, we don't have like real permissions over this. That means people can change it. And one of the rules of the Flyweight is you are not allowed to change these, because if you change these, you're changing it for everything that's reading it. So if your one weapon is changing the time between attacks, every other weapon of that type will receive that change, which might not be what you want. And you have to be very careful, because scriptable objects are also serialized data assets. People use them for stuff like saving scenes and stuff. So, things to consider. Anyways, we have this information here. So we do want it to be public, but what we can implement is a get set. Get private set. And we want to put that in all of them. Now, if you're in a good IDE, like Writer for Unreal Engine, or just Writer in general, it'll actually warn you now that serialized field doesn't do anything. So what we need to do is say field, serialized field, and that will allow this to work. Now we need to correct the names as well for proper convention, because they are public fields. So we'll make them capital. Okay, we have all of our stuff. And then we need to tag this also as field. There we go. So we've defined all of our fields, we have the ability to get these properties, and then finally, we need to look back at our weapon base. Is there anything else that we could possibly move? Our current fire timer, every weapon should know that their own fire timer is. There is no way to make it so every weapon has their own. The is on cooldown, that belongs to the weapon. So is the charge time. But the cooldown that is based exclusively on the time between attacks, why does it matter that the weapon knows this? This is constant. This just doesn't change, right? So let's create a function on here. And I believe what we want to do is do on enable. And then we need to also make our variable. So let's move this in. And then instead of having this one be a field and serialized field in that, we don't want to be able to access this. This should be exclusive, at least the way we're using it right now, it should be exclusive to here. And instead, this one will be public. Public, okay, and we can't make it read-only because of how this works, unfortunately. But public cooldown, and then we're going to say get set. Okay, and now in here, we're going to give it its value, time between attacks, and then over here, let's make this one private. And if it's private, we don't need a get set. We can make this lowercase, and then we don't need to say field serialized field. And then because we don't need to say field serialized field there, we don't need to do it over there either. Cool. So now what we don't want to get is this, and what we do want to get is this. And we can delete this line now entirely, and here. And like that is actually huge, although it seems little, because that means now whenever you create a weapon, it's already done this, and it doesn't need to do that calculation again. So you're saving actually a substantial amount of RAM just with that one small trick. People hate that trick. Doctors hate it. Anyways, so now we have a bunch of errors, and the question is, how do we get these, right? How do we like access them now out of our weapon SO? So what you need to do is we make a serialized field, private weapon SO, and it's going to be our weapon stats. Okay. And now, because it's just a class reference, right, we've developed a component, we can literally say weapon stats dot charge time. That's it. It's as easy as that, and like an understanding of C# and how code works. Although understanding this your first time around can be a little bit confusing, so hopefully I didn't lose you along the way here. All right, that's it. We literally have lost nothing. I'm not sure what this is, but yeah, no, we literally lost nothing. Let's go back into our game and let's develop this. So in our game, when you right click, we now have create, and then at the top, my scriptable objects weapon stats, which if you recall is what we said earlier. So it's here, it works, fantastic. Let's open it. Let's create a default weapon. Let's call it projectile weapon, or let's call it pea shooter. It doesn't really matter. And then let's give it some values. It's going to have a charge up time of 1, a time between attacks of 0.2, and a min charge percent of 0. It will be fully auto. Then I need to rebind it as my weapon. So my weapon stats for my projectile weapon is going to be the pea shooter weapon stats. Or you can even press on this arrow and you'll see it. There you go. And you'll see because the weapon stats is set to be like this, our pea shooter is as well. And then we get our weapon with our stats. Let's bind it to our game. So my weapon is our weapon. And finally, you should see that nothing has changed. Everything should still be working, and the only downside is none. There is no downside. Yeah, everything is still working. Very cool. That's it. There are many, many more things you can put this into. Make it so that way the enemies are scriptable objects. Make it so that way the bullets are scriptable objects. Make it so that way the players are scriptable objects. Abilities. So many reasons, so many ways you can do this. Just be creative with it and really think about what your code is doing.